Welcome to Grief is the New Normal. I'm Dr. Heather Taylor, a licensed psychologist and grief specialist, here to help change the conversation about grief and build community and connection while we all adjust to this new normal we are living in. This podcast is for you if you are grieving or if you are supporting someone in a season of grief. I'm glad you're here. Hey friends, welcome back to Grief is the New Normal. I'm Dr. Heather Taylor, grief psychologist, and today we're going to talk about something that really shouldn't be taboo anymore, yet somehow it still is. Death. That's right. We're going all in today on why our society is so weird about death, why it's whispered about, avoided, glossed over, and sanitized really into phrases like passed away peacefully, they're in a better place, we lost them. Here's the truth. Death is not the problem. Our discomfort around it is. So in today's episode, we're going to talk about why people are so afraid to talk about death, the harmful ways that stigma shows up for grievers, and how to start making space for real conversations about dying and grief and what it means to live. So if you've ever felt like you had to make your grief palatable for others or pretend like you were over it because your pain was making people uncomfortable, this one's for you. So let's just name it. Death is a part of life. It is the most universal lived experience. There's a reason people have the colloquialism, nothing's sure in life except death and taxes. It literally is the only universal human experience aside from birth. And yet, most people will do anything to avoid talking about it. They'll change the subject, throw in some kind of toxic positive quote, or even make a joke to avoid the real feelings that come up. And I guess I want to talk about why is that? There's a few reasons. So first, we in our society tend to have a fear of mortality, meaning if we talk about death, people have to then face the fact that it's going to happen to them too. And that's scary. That's uncomfortable. That brings up a whole bunch of other questions about what we've done with our time here. What does it mean to live? I get that it's scary talking about death. We have no guarantees of how much time we're going to have on this earth. And we want to feel like we've done something important, that we have a legacy, that we've made a mark, that we've experienced the things we wanted to experience, read the things we wanted to read. And yet there's no guarantee that we're going to get to do all those things. There's limitations. And when we talk about death and decisions about what we want to do, if we have, who's going to make the medical decisions for us, who's going to be left behind, who is going to take care of my people, like that, those are complicated feelings that can come up. Cultural conditioning. Many of us grew up in environments where death was only discussed in hushed tones, if at all. We just never talked about it. I know in my house growing up, we didn't really talk about it. I remember in 5th grade when my grandpa died and I didn't want to go to his funeral because I didn't want to say goodbye. And that's the one memory about death, I think, that comes to mind when I think of my childhood. And by childhood, I'm meaning 10 and younger. That's the only time we really talked about it. When a pet would die, will they go to a better place? Okay, what's that mean? There's these questions that we have, the why questions, as kids and adults can be really uncomfortable talking about it if they haven't started to work their own feelings about their mortality are. And that can be awkward and uncomfortable. And then number 3, there's this emotional avoidance. Talking about death cracks open vulnerability. And for some folks, that's a no-go. We don't have the capacity or energy to fall apart to talk about something that is so emotionally raw. So we just avoid it because it has a lot of complicated feelings attached, and we maybe don't have the spoons to go there. However, the problem is if we avoid talking about death, we also avoid talking about grief. And that leaves people grieving in silence, alone, unacknowledged. And that's hard, right? So, story time with Heather. My grandma's story, bless her heart, love her so much, miss her so much. Remember one Christmas Eve, I was in my early 20s. That was our big family holiday, we'd all get together, we do a big gift exchange, we do a food exchange, which more stories about that later. And we were about to start the gift exchange, and Grandma stood up and proud as day, she just stands up and goes, I just want to let everyone know that my funeral is fully paid for, and the news article is already paid for. Everything is already paid for. And just flat announces that in the middle of Christmas Eve, as we're about to all start opening presents and doing our exchange, and we're all holly jolly. And for her, she felt pride and peace that this thing she had chosen to do and to have control over, she had taken care of it for our family. And the rest of us, I remember looking at my cousin Lauren, and we just both start crying. Like, is there something we don't know? Why would you talk about this right now? Because our family at this point, we weren't used to talking about death and dying. My brother was still around. Our family had been pretty insulated from a lot of big loss and big grief. And so it felt so out of left field for her to announce this on Christmas Eve. And in looking back on that now, I think that was her way of trying to let us know, like, she wanted to talk about it. She wanted to let us know what her plans were, how she wanted things to resolve when she was gone, and to reduce our stress and worry about trying to navigate these big decisions, the business of grief, after she had gone. And that was a huge gift from her. And she wanted to let us know. Grandma's got to work on her timing a little bit. She felt like she was giving us this gift, and it was top of mind, and she wanted to share. And so she did. I also think about these conversations that I've had with my own parents, or have helped clients have with their parents who are aging, about not knowing what they want. So often we avoid talking about the business of dying, those decisions that we have to make in that after space after they're gone. And parents they don't want to think about it, and will avoid talking about it, especially when you think of generational patterns talking around death. And if we want to honor our families, we want to honor their wishes, we have to have those conversations. And so I've worked with a number of clients in helping empower them to, like, hey, if you get in a car accident and you're in a coma, what do you want to happen? What kind of interventions do you want? I get that this is uncomfortable to talk about. I get that you don't think this is going to happen anytime soon. Great. I don't want this to happen anytime soon. And I want to know what you want, because that helps reduce my anxiety in making sure your wishes are honored. And I don't want you to go anywhere. I just want to know that things are planned out, that we've got a direction to move, where we know where the things are, because I'm going to be wrecked when you're gone. And if we can reduce that strain just a little bit by knowing what you want, that's going to help us all be in a better space to actually grieve, rather than trying to find documents and being stressed about decisions, because we'll already know what you want. So I want to have an intentional conversation about your plans, where the paperwork is, who's in charge of what. And all of these questions can help. Yes, it's talking about death, and it's also talking about setting us up to be successful while we're grieving. So I think that's important to start those conversations. We're going to pivot a bit. Okay. I want to get real for a second. There's so much stigma around grief and death, right? And so when people refuse to talk about their death, or talk about death, what they're really doing is saying, your grief is too much for me. And you know what that does? It isolates the hell out of people. It turns grief into something private, something to be managed quietly behind doors, so nobody has to feel uncomfortable. And that grief is already such an isolating experience. This just doubles down on it even more when people won't talk about the death piece. Some examples of what this can look like is a coworker avoiding eye contact after your loss, a friend saying something like, you're still upset about that? Or people change the subject when you bring up your person's name. And when this happens, we internalize it. We start thinking, maybe I am too much. Maybe I should stop talking about it. And here's what I want you to hear. Grief isn't the problem. Silence is. So if you've ever felt like your grief made people pull away, you are not the problem. Their discomfort is not your burden to carry. Okay, so how do we start shifting this? How do we actually talk about death and grief in a way that's real and human and not sanitized or sugar-coated? So here's a few things I teach and practice, whether I'm with clients, friends, or on this podcast with all of you. So 1, let's use real language. Please, let's use real language. Say died, say death, say dead. I know it sounds harsh, and that's just because we're not used to saying it. And using clear language helps normalize the reality and cuts through the vague, emotionally distant stuff. It's not fun to say. And that's okay. Not everything that we talk about or say is going to be fun. However, we need to start normalizing the reality, normalizing using these direct, clear, succinct language choices, because that's going to help reduce the anxiety about talking about it when we get used to saying it more. 2, let people talk about their person. Ask their name. Ask what they were like. Ask them to share a favorite memory or a story. Don't change the subject. Lean in. I talked about this on the very first episode of this podcast, literally called Leaning Into Loss. We're leaning in because you don't have to fix it. We're just holding space. So worrying that if I lean in, that I'm gonna have to do something with it. This isn't the time to be doing. This is just being and holding space and normalizing talking about their person. Number 3, check your own avoidance. If you feel uncomfortable when death comes up, get curious about that. Is it fear? Is it not knowing what to say? Is it past grief that you haven't dealt with? Awareness is the first step towards being more present. And there's so many ways bias and privilege can show up in the grief space as well. So having an understanding of how our own biases and privilege around loss can impact our ability to lean in and be safe spaces for those grieving around us. We want to do our work there. So let's be curious. Let's emotionally explore. Let's take care of ourselves so we can hold space for others. 4, model what it means to grieve openly. If you are someone who has experienced loss, you get to take up space. Talking about it isn't trauma dumping. It's truth telling. It's sharing your story. It's sharing the story of the person that you're carrying with you that's no longer physically here. How they died might have been traumatic. However, it's not trauma dumping to share your story. And I think as a society, we need to dial back some of the overusage of mental health specific language that then allows us to not engage, because that's a boundary, because they're trauma dumping. Are they trauma dumping, or are they just storytelling? Are they asking you to fix it? Are they asking you to carry that? Or are they just asking you to hold space and be with them in that pain? So be curious. All right. So let's start to wrap up this episode with some real talk. So 1, death is not the enemy, avoidance is. And the more that we avoid talking about death and dying, the harder it gets to talk about it. It's like that pit in the stomach feeling you get when you are at odds with a friend or you've done something wrong, and it just starts to build and build. And then you make the repair and you feel better on the other side. So avoiding talking about death has that same physiological response. Or if you see someone suffering in their grief and you're avoiding asking or talking to them about it, like that's doubling down on that discomfort within your physical space. Another thought, grief is not contagious, but the silence around it can be. So when we see someone grieving or know someone who's experienced a death, a loss, ask about it. It's not like asking, how are you doing? It's not if we invite someone to share what's happening in their grief box, then that means their grief is going to latch onto us. It's not sticky. It's not transferable. It doesn't mean that we're going to then experience a death as well. But if we don't talk about it, then that's almost, it makes it permissible for no one else to have to talk about it. And that silence continues. We can't support each other through grief if we're too scared to talk about death. We have to let both of those things take up space and get more comfortable having these kinds of conversations. It's important. And final thought, final takeaway, most important, you are not too much just because your grief makes people uncomfortable. You are allowed to let your grief take up space. You are allowed to express and process those feelings as much or as little as you want to, and you get to determine who those safe people and those safe spaces are to share and talk about your loss. So here's your invitation for this week. Let's talk about death. Let's use real words. Let's say their name. Let's ask someone how they're really doing and hold space while they find their answer. We don't need to rush people through their grief process. That doesn't help them. And if you're grieving and someone tries to shut you down, know that you're allowed to keep talking anyways. You don't have to talk with them. You can find someone else to talk about. That doesn't mean that you are too much or not enough or doing this wrong. It just means that maybe there's someone who can't be in that space with you. So if this episode gave you something to think about, I'd encourage you to share it with a friend. Feel free to tag me on Instagram at Grief is the New Normal. And let's keep this conversation going, because death deserves more space, and so does your grief. Remember to be kind to yourselves today, everyone, and we'll see you next time. Take care. That's it for today's episode of Grief is the New Normal. If this conversation resonated with you or you think it might benefit someone else, please share it. Sharing can open doors to healing, understanding, and normalizing these griefy conversations. If you're craving deeper insights or ongoing support, consider signing up for the Grief Gap newsletter. It's packed with resources, tips, and personal stories to help you navigate your grief journey. Visit the website www.griefisthenewnormal.com to subscribe. For those who prefer a more personal touch to their healing process, check out my grief journal, Authentically Unapologetic. It's designed to help you explore your grief on your own terms, with prompts and exercises that encourage reflection and growth. I'm Dr. Heather Taylor, and I look forward to our next meaningful conversation. Our soothing tunes are provided by the Datacorns. If you're interested in sharing your story, collaborating, or learning more, please email me at hello@griefisthenewnormal.com. You can also stream the episodes on YouTube for more engaging content. Until next time, keep exploring your grief with intention and support, remembering you don't have to do this alone.